I am 90 years old. 90. I want you to sit with that number for a moment before I say anything else, because that number is the only credential I have left, and it cost me more than I ever agreed to pay. 90 years of mornings. 90 years of hands that worked, and a back that bent, and a heart that kept beating even when I gave it every reason in the world to stop. 90 years, and I am sitting in this chair that I have learned to hate and depend on in equal measure, and I am looking at my hands right now. The left one trembling the way it has trembled every morning for the past 6 years. And I am thinking about everything these hands used to do and everything they can no longer do. And I know that most of what they lost, I gave away myself. Not to time, not to God, not to fate. I gave it away with a fork, with a spoon. With 38 years of choices I made 3 times a day. Every single day, without ever once stopping to ask what those choices were doing to the only body I was ever going to have. I was not always this man in this chair. That is the thing I need you to understand before anything else. There was a man before this one. A man who stood 6 feet tall, and never asked anyone for help carrying a thing. A man who worked 12-hour days on a construction site from the age of 19 all the way to 6, who could lift beams and haul materials and come home sweating and still have enough left to mow the lawn, fix the fence, carry my wife Dorothy up the stairs as a joke that always made her laugh until she cried. That man existed. I was that man. And that man did not disappear because of age. He disappeared because I treated the body that carried him like a machine that did not require maintenance. Like a workhorse that did not require care. Like something that was just there to serve me until I was done with it. And the body. My body. It served me faithfully for decades. It absorbed every punishment I gave it. It processed every terrible thing I put inside it. It woke up every morning and kept going. And I took that as evidence that I was fine. That I was strong. That the rules everyone talked about did not apply to me. The body does not forget. That is what I know now that I did not know then. The body keeps a ledger. Every bad meal, every wrong choice, everything you consume that corrodes instead of builds, the body writes it down. Not immediately. That is the cruelty of it. The consequence does not arrive the next morning. It arrives 20 years later, 30 years later, when you have completely forgotten the deposit, and you look down, and the bill is so large, you cannot pay it all at once. You pay it in pieces. You pay it with your knees. You pay it with your blood pressure. You pay it with your memory. You pay it with the ability to stand up from a chair without gripping the armrests. With everything you have, you pay it with your dignity. That word, dignity, is why I am talking today. Because no one warned me that food could take my dignity. No one sat me down at 40 years old and said, the way you are eating right now is going to determine whether you need someone to help you bathe at 85. Nobody said that, and if they had, I probably would have laughed. Because I was 40, and I was strong. And the idea of needing someone to help me bathe was so far from anything I could imagine that it would have seemed like a bad joke. It was not a joke. It happened, and it happened because of 6 specific things I put in my body for decades that I should have stopped long before I finally did. If you are still here with me, if something in these first words has reached somewhere real inside you, I want to ask something of you before I go any further. Subscribe to this channel. Not for any reason that has to do with numbers. Subscribe because someone you love is probably making the same deposits I made, the same withdrawals I made, and they do not know the bill that is coming. Subscribe so that what I am about to tell you can reach them. It almost did not reach me in time. Let it reach someone else while there is still time to matter. I need to tell you about the ally I abused. That is the only honest way I know how to say it. My body was my ally from the day I was born. It carried me through everything. Through the early years when we had nothing and I worked before the sun came up and after it went down. Through the years of raising 3 children, Robert, Patricia, and the youngest, James. through the years of hauling concrete and steel on job sites, where the temperature hit 104 degrees in the summer, and I never stopped moving. My body was extraordinary. I know that now. At the time, I just thought it was normal. I thought everyone's body did what mine did. I thought strength was a fixed quality. Something you either had or you didn't. Not something you cultivated. Not something you could lose through 1,000 small betrayals delivered on a plate. I was 34 years old when the pattern really set in. I remember it with the kind of clarity that only regret produces. It was a Tuesday morning in the summer of 1969, and I was sitting at the kitchen table at 5:45 in the morning. And Dorothy had already gone to tend to the children, and I had in front of me what I had in front of me every single morning for the next 31 years without variation. 4 strips of bacon fried until they were almost black, 2 eggs fried in the bacon fat, 3 slices of white bread with a thick layer of butter, and a mug of coffee with 4 spoons of sugar. Every morning, 365 days a year. I am not exaggerating when I say 31 years, because I have counted. I have had the time to count. That breakfast, that exact breakfast, went into my body approximately 11,315 times before I finally stopped. I thought it was fuel. I thought a man who worked the way I worked needed that kind of food. I thought the fat built strength. I thought the bread gave energy. I thought the sugar in the coffee was just a small pleasure that a hard-working man had earned. I thought the bacon was just what men ate. I was wrong about every single one of those things. And my arteries spent 31 years quietly confirming how wrong I was, one deposit at a time, while I sat there proud of my appetite and my strength and my absolute refusal to think twice about anything I put in my mouth. The second thing was the salt. I want to talk about the salt because I think it is the one that did the most damage over the longest time and the one that left the least obvious trail until the trail became impossible to ignore. I salted everything. I had a habit. Dorothy used to shake her head at it and never quite managed to make me stop of salting food before I tasted it. I would sit down at the table and reach for the shaker before I had taken a single bite. I salted my eggs before eating them. I salted my bread. I salted my meat before it went in the pan and after it came out. I put salt on things that had no business having more salt, canned soups that were already swimming in sodium, processed meats that had been cured in salt for days. I did this for 40 years. 40 years of excess sodium going directly into my bloodstream, directly into my vessels, pressing against the walls of my arteries from the inside with a pressure that I could not feel and therefore did not believe was real. My blood pressure at 58 years old was 174/102. The doctor looked at those numbers and told me I needed to make changes immediately. I told him I felt fine. I left his office and salted my lunch. At 61, I had a small stroke. They called it minor. I did not feel minor. I was standing in the driveway on a Saturday morning, and I reached down to pick up the newspaper. And when I straightened up, something was wrong on the left side of my face. Not pain, just wrongness. A kind of numbness that spread from my cheek to my jaw to my left hand in about 30 seconds. I sat down on the front steps, and I sat there for 20 minutes waiting for it to pass. And when Dorothy came out and saw my face, she knew immediately what I was too stubborn to admit. The hospital kept me for 4 days. They explained what had happened. They explained what would happen next if I did not change. I changed the salt. Not immediately. Not completely. But I reduced it, and I kept reducing it. And when I finally cut it out almost entirely at 6, my blood pressure came down to 141/87 within 4 months. 7 years. I waited 7 years after my first warning to make a real change. 7 years of continued damage. 7 years I cannot have back. If any of this is landing somewhere real inside you, if you recognize someone in what I am describing, even if that someone is yourself, press the like button on this video. It tells me I am not speaking into silence. It tells me that the weight of what I am carrying here is reaching someone who needs to carry it too. If only for a few minutes. If only long enough to make one different choice than the one I made. The third thing I need to tell you about is the processed meat. The bologna, the salami, the hot dogs, the packaged sausages. These were the foods of my weekdays. The foods of my lunch breaks. The foods I ate, standing up at a job site with a can of soda in the other hand, for 22 years. From the time I was 37 until I was 59 and the doctor sat me down with a piece of paper showing my cholesterol at 268. I ate processed meat almost every day, sometimes twice a day. I liked the convenience. I liked the taste. I liked the way it required no thought and no preparation. I could grab it in the morning, throw it between 2 slices of white bread, eat it in 5 minutes, and get back to work. Nobody was telling me in 1972 what they know now about what those nitrates and that sodium and that saturated fat were doing to the lining of my vessels. But even when they started telling it, even when the information began to be available, I found ways not to hear it. I was not stupid. I was not uninformed. I was invested. I had eaten this way for 2 decades, and I was still standing, and the standing felt like proof enough. The fourth thing was the sugar. Not just the sugar in my coffee, which I have already told you about, but the sugar in everything else. The desserts after every dinner that Dorothy made because she loved making them, and I loved eating them. The sweet pastries on Sunday mornings. The sodas I drank at a rate of approximately 2 per day from my late 30s through my 50s. The packaged cookies I kept in the truck. The sweet tea at every restaurant we ever sat down in. I was consuming somewhere between 90 and 120 grams of added sugar on a typical day for the better part of 30 years. I know that number now because a nutritionist calculated it backward from what I described to her when I was 74 and finally, desperately, willing to listen. She put the calculation on a piece of paper and slid it across the table to me and watched my face while I read it. And what I felt reading it was not surprise. It was recognition. It was the feeling of finally seeing written down in numbers what my body had been trying to tell me for 20 years in symptoms I had chosen not to understand. The fifth thing was the fried food. I need to be specific because I think when people hear fried food, they think of something occasional, something indulgent, something they have once in a while. For me, fried food was not occasional. From the age of 35 to the age of 70, I ate something deep fried at minimum 4 times per week. Fried chicken on Sundays, which was a tradition in our house that I refused to give up no matter what anyone said. Fried fish on Fridays. Fried potatoes, not occasionally, but almost every evening, because I had grown up eating them and I had never developed a preference for any other kind. The oil those foods were fried in, the trans fats that were standard in commercial frying operations through the 70s and 80s and 90s, accumulated in my bloodstream and my vessel walls over 36 years in a way that had no dramatic announcement, no single moment I could point to and say, there, that is when it happened. It happened everywhere at once, slowly, invisibly. The way rust happens to a structure that looks solid from the outside until the day it cannot hold its own weight anymore. There are people in your life right now who are trying to tell you something about the way you eat. A spouse, a child, a doctor. Someone who loves you and is watching you make deposits into a ledger whose bill they are afraid to see. Subscribe to this channel. Not for me. Do it so you can share what I am saying here with the person in your life who needs it. Because I was warned. I was warned by Dorothy for 20 years. And I heard her the way you hear rain on a roof when you are warm inside, present, registered, and completely disconnected from anything that required action. Do not be me. Do not be that person who hears the rain and rolls over and goes back to sleep. I want to tell you what the ledger looks like from where I am sitting. I want to tell you the inventory of what I paid. Because I think most people who are eating the way I ate do not understand that the payment is not one catastrophic event. It is a series of withdrawals that happen over years. each one taking something you thought was permanent. At 68 years old, I needed reading glasses, not unusual. But I also had neuropathy in my feet severe enough that some mornings I could not feel the floor when I first stood up, which was connected directly to the blood sugar dysregulation I had spent 30 years creating. At 72, I had a second cardiovascular event, more serious than the first. And the cardiologist told me plainly that my arteries showed the accumulation of a lifetime of dietary inflammation. He used a phrase I have never forgotten. He said my arteries looked 20 years older than I was. At 72, my arteries looked 90. I have spent the last 18 years trying to reverse that math and making only partial progress because you cannot undo in 18 years what you built over 38. At 78, I fell. A simple fall. Missed the bottom step coming out of the kitchen, went down on my right side, broke my hip. The fall itself was not connected to diet, but the recovery was. The bone density I had lost through decades of inadequate nutrition meant the break was worse than it should have been. And the recovery took 14 months instead of the 6 the doctor projected. During those 14 months, I was dependent, fully, completely, humiliatingly dependent on my daughter Patricia, and a rotating series of home health aides for things I will not list in detail, because the listing of them still produces in me a shame so acute I have to stop and breathe through it. What I will say is that a man who spent his entire adult life never asking for help, never needing anyone to do a thing for him, was being helped in ways he could not have imagined and could not have prepared himself for psychologically. And the worst part, the part that still finds me in the early morning hours when I cannot sleep, is that I know, with a certainty that goes all the way to the bottom of me, that the severity of that dependence was not inevitable. It was the invoice for choices I had made at the table 3 times a day for 4 decades. Now let me tell you about the 3 illusions I lived inside, because I think you may be living inside at least one of them right now. And I think they're the reason that even people who have some awareness of what they are eating cannot seem to stop. The first illusion was that I had time. I was always going to take better care of myself later, after the busy season at work, after the kids were grown, after Dorothy and I retired and could slow down and make proper meals instead of the things we grabbed because we were always moving. Later was always available. Later never ran out until it did. I spent 40 years taking comfort in later, and by the time later arrived, the damage was done. I do not have a specific year to assign to the moment I ran out of later. It was not dramatic. It was just one morning when I realized that the changes I was going to make eventually had become changes I was now making in desperation, trying to slow something that had already arrived. If you're 45 years old right now, later is something you still believe in. I am telling you from 90 years of accumulated evidence that later is a fiction. The body does not wait for you to be ready. The second illusion was that because the harm was invisible, it was not real. I could not see my arteries. I could not see my blood pressure pushing against my vessel walls. I could not see the inflammation building in my joints, or the calcium depleting from my bones, or the insulin resistance developing in my cells. I could only see what I could see: a man who could work all day and eat what he wanted and still function. And I confused the absence of visible consequence with the absence of consequence entirely. This is the most dangerous illusion because it is the most reasonable sounding one. It feels like logic. It is not logic. It is the logic of someone who decides their house is not on fire because they cannot yet see the flames, even though the walls have been smoldering for years. The third illusion was resilience. I told myself, and I believed it with a confidence that was almost aggressive, that I was built differently, that my body could handle things that other bodies could not, that I had earned a kind of biological exemption through the sheer amount of physical work I had done. Real men who worked the way I worked. I told myself, burn through whatever they eat. The body compensates. The body adapts. The body, if it is strong enough, absorbs the punishment and comes through clean on the other side. I know now that this is precisely backwards. The harder you work a body, the more it requires premium fuel. The more you push it, the more the damage of poor nutrition compounds. My illusion of resilience was not protecting me. It was accelerating the destruction by ensuring I never took the steps that might have slowed it. I want to give you the honest accounting now, what I used to do and what I do now, because I think the contrast is the most useful thing I can leave you with. I used to eat that bacon and egg breakfast every single morning. For the past 12 years I have eaten oatmeal with a handful of walnuts and half a banana. My left knee stopped swelling within 3 months of making that change. I do not fully understand the mechanism. I know the result. I used to put salt on everything before I tasted it and salt it again if it seemed to need it. For the past 16 years, I have used no added salt at all. And I season food with herbs that Dorothy taught me before she passed in 2009. And my blood pressure sits at 132 over, which my doctor calls remarkable for a man of 90. I used to eat processed meat 4 to 5 times per week. I have not eaten it in 19 years. My cholesterol dropped 61 points in the first year after I stopped. 61 points from one change. I think about that number often. I think about the 19 years before that when I could have dropped those points and didn't. I used to drink 2 sodas a day and consume sugar in quantities that would alarm you if I listed them precisely. I have not had a soda in 14 years. I have not eaten added sugar in 9 years. What I can tell you about cutting sugar is that the first 4 weeks were genuinely difficult. I craved it the way I imagine someone craves a substance. And after 8 weeks, I stopped craving it entirely. And after 6 months, things that I had always found merely normal began tasting sweet to me on their own, as if my palate had been recalibrated to find what had always been there. I used to eat fried food 4 times per week. I have not eaten anything deep fried in 11 years. My energy in the morning, even at 90, even with everything else, is different than it was at 75, when I was still eating fried things. I cannot call it high energy, but I can call it consistent. It does not crash. It does not plummet at 2 in the afternoon, the way it did for decades. And the 6th thing, the white bread. The refined flour in everything. The pasta and the rolls and the crackers, I replaced all of it with whole grains 18 years ago. And my blood sugar stabilized within 6 months in a way that reduced the neuropathy in my feet enough that I can feel the floor again when I first stand up in the morning. I do not have a dramatic transformation story. I want to be clear about that. I made these changes too late to reverse the major structural damage that had been done. I still need the chair. I still need help with things I wish I did not need help with. The hip that broke at 78 healed, but it healed imperfectly. And some days it speaks to me in a language of pain that I have learned to simply inhabit. What I have is not recovery. What I have is the slowing of decline. The changes I made at 74 and 78 and 81 have not given me back what I lost, but they have given me the lost 16 years in a state that is better than it would have been, and at 90 years old, better than it would have been, is not nothing. It is, in fact, everything. I do not have much left to give anyone. I know that. My body tells me every morning exactly how much time the ledger has remaining, and the number is not large. But if something I said today reaches you, if you are going to put down the salt shaker, or pour the soda out, or look at that processed meat and decide it is not worth the cost, give this video a like, not for the people who run this channel. For me, so that when I am gone, there is some small record somewhere that the things I learned at the end of my life mattered to someone who still had time to use them. Let me tell you what I would do. If I could go back to the age of 34 and sit down at that kitchen table in the summer of 1969, I would put down the bacon, not because someone told me to, but because I would know. I would carry forward the knowledge I have now. What those 11,000 breakfasts were going to cost me, I would stop the salt immediately and permanently. Not at 68 after a stroke, but at 34 before any damage had been done. I would eliminate the processed meat and replace it with something that required 30 more seconds of preparation and gave the body something to build with, instead of something to defend against. I would cut the sugar, not reduce it, cut it, and I would do it young enough that the metabolic damage never accumulated in the first place. I would eat whole food, simple, unprocessed, whole food, prepared in ways that did not destroy what was in it. And I would do all of this not because I was afraid of dying, because at 34 you are not afraid of dying, but because I would know what I know now about dignity. About what it means to be a man at 85 who can stand up from a chair without help. About what it means to a woman like Dorothy to be married to a man who is strong enough to still be her partner and not just her patient. About what it means to your children to watch you age with your autonomy intact, to not spend their middle years arranging their schedules around your dependents. I am tired now. That is the honest truth. I am tired in a way that sleep does not fix. A tiredness that lives in the bones and the muscles and somewhere deeper than both. But I am not tired of having said this. I needed to say it. I have needed to say it for a long time, and I am grateful something like this exists that lets an old man in a chair say the things that took him a lifetime to learn. My left hand is still trembling. It will tremble until the end. That trembling is the bill I am still paying. The last installment of a ledger I opened in 1969 at a kitchen table when I reached for the salt shaker without thinking, and Dorothy watched me and shook her head and said nothing because she had already said everything and I had already not listened. Do not be the person who does not listen. You have something I no longer have, which is time. Not infinite time. Nobody has that. But enough time, if you start now, to change what the ledger says. Enough time to protect something that once lost cannot be recovered. Enough time to be at 80 or 85 or 90. A person who stands up on their own and walks to the window in the morning and watches the sun come up without needing to ask anyone for help doing it. That is not a small thing. From where I am sitting, that is everything. Go. Start today. Do not wait until later, because I have already shown you exactly what later costs. I'm tired now. Go. Don't wait like I did.